Alright, I'm back. This is part 4, and as you can see, the diaphragm is in, the inner and outer gaskets are on, the bezel is back in and screwed in place, and there's been several moments in trying to describe how to do something to somebody else that the best way I can describe this, I think, in putting this together is it's like changing a bicycle tire. Okay, or changing the tube on a bicycle tire. If you've ever done that before, done it many a times as I have done, you understand kind of this process and what's involved. So with that done and out of the way, it's time now to do the needle bar. And this reproducer uses a needle bar pivot system that is not unlike that on a timepiece, where you have cone pointed screws and cup pivots. And if you've ever messed with an alarm clock or a watch, you'll see it's the exact opposite, where the cup is in the moving part and the cone is stationary. And unlike a timekeeper, where there's a little bit of shake desired, there is no shake that can be tolerated in this design. So what we're going to do first is, without the lock nuts in play, but we'll have to put them in place first, is install the screws with the lock nuts backed out as far as they'll go on the screws. I'm going to install the first screw here. These are, if you look at the tap I used here, this will give you the size of the screw thread on these. These are 4/36. If you're following along with your own Brunswick head. And we're going to screw this in. Just do this by hand. Screw this in until the point is just visible there, and then back it off to where it's flush with the edge of that boss. We'll do the same thing on the other side now. We'll put it together. And the other side, the one that was stuck, appears to have a brass nut on it. Maybe they're both brass nuts, and just the nickel plating is not worn off of the one, and it is the other. But this one here is very definitely brass. You see the nut turns so free on the get back here to where it's almost like it's staked to the screw. There, the whole thing's turning. Get it to about the same position as it was on the other side. Where you can just see the point poking through and then stop. There we go. It's just poking through. I'm going to get the needle bar here and lay it in place. And I'm going to evenly turn each of these down until the needle bar comes into contact with both of them. very tiny little pieces here to be twiddling. Okay, I don't have the, you can see it's cocked. I don't have the cone point in on this one. This one here, I can still adjust with the screwdriver. There we go. Okay, it's in place now. Now, as you can see, I need to center it. You can see right now it's not centered. It's closer to this side than it is that side. So I need to screw one side in a little. And screw one side out a little. Okay. As you can see, even though it's centered, still not perfectly straight. This is, I'll have to do a little bit of adjusting to get the foot here to reach the hole. But before we remake that attachment, let's do the adjustments here to where we can lock the lock nuts. Now the amount of play that there is in these bearings, you'll be able to feel it much more out here than you would be able to feel it down here. As you can see, there's considerable play. And it looks like we could go that way a little bit more to center it. So I'm going to tighten this side up just a touch. I'm going to tighten, just gently snug the lock nut down, just finger tight, so it's providing just a little bit of resistance to the points. And I'm going to turn this just a little bit. You see it's just tight enough that it very, very freely moves, but it doesn't coast, and it doesn't want to fall under the influence of gravity one way or the other. It's just snug. And I would suggest setting it up just a little bit on the snug side, especially if you're in a warm room, because in the winter, as everything contracts and the pivot points pull away from the needle bar, and the needle bar contracts and shrinks, it's going to buzz. And in the summer, everything's going to tighten up and it's going to be stiff, but it's still very free moving. But the important thing is there any play? You're going to move this just so, because you don't want to mistake bending the needle bar for play. And there is no perceptible play at all. It's tight. And you can tell moving it back and forth that it's tight. And I don't mean like, you know, tight, but remember, you want it to be quite free, because this is going to be transmitting the vibration of the record groove to the diaphragm. And if I back this off just a bit to where there was zero play but it was loose, you would have buzzing, particularly when you go through a temperature change from summer to winter. And so you set it up like this to where there's just snug like this. Now we can tighten down the lock nuts. Then you need to recheck the adjustment after you've tightened the lock nuts up. Make sure that it's still just as loose as it was and not any tighter than it was. And if it needs readjusted, then back a lock nut off and readjust and repeat. And do this until you're happy with it, until it's the minimum amount of effort required to move it, but it's not free floating. You don't want it to be too loose. Once you've got that adjustment made, the next adjustment is to get this foot lined up with the hole. You can see the hole in the diaphragm there. The other adjustment to be made is to make sure that the foot contacts the diaphragm flat and not, as you can see here, it's not contacting the diaphragm flat. So once again, we've sort of reached the limit of the length of the video, so let me do these adjustments off camera and we'll come back.